Consultancy, training and advice from the IT Service. www.theitservice.co.uk.
Hello and welcome to part 2 of this guide to pivot tables. Hopefully you've had a look at part 1 and found that interesting. If not, and if you're not sure what a pivot table is, then that might be a better place to start. But we're going to take a look at some of the more advanced features, or the less well-known features of pivot tables in Excel 2007. There are some differences in pivot tables between 2007 and 2003, mostly in where things are, although there are also some more advanced features that have been added into 2007 to make your life a little bit easier. So if you have got Excel 2003, then you might need to kind of have a look around to find the things that we're looking at, and there might be one or two little bits and bobs that aren't there, but essentially we're talking about the same tool here. Now, as I say, if you looked at part 1 of this tutorial, then you'll be familiar with this piece of data, but just in case not, we have some order information here. We've got for each row of data the name of the company, our customer that ordered it, where they reside, the city and the country, the ID for each order, the date for each order, and then moving across to the right here we've got what they ordered, how many they ordered, the price at which we offered it to them, and therefore the total, which is simply the quantity multiplied by the price, and who the supplier is of that product. We've got a bit of data here. We've got, if I just zoom down to the bottom, 2100 odd rows of data, so a fair amount of data, more certainly than would allow us to analyze the data and pick up patterns, except through the use of some other tools such as a pivot table. So I'm just going to go right ahead and build a pivot table. That's on the Insert tab here at the top. If I choose Insert, Pivot Table, I can choose a pivot chart. I'll look at those a little later, but pivot table. Question 1 in our little dialog box is, where's the data? Is it coming from within Excel, and if so, where? And question 2, where is it going? So I'm simply going to say, yep, that's right, A1 to, what's that, J2156 on the current sheet, order history, and it's going into a new worksheet. So I'll click OK. There's my pivot table. Now, we've looked at this before, so I'm just going to build a pivot table fairly quickly here. So I'm going to add in the company name here on the left. Perhaps I'd like to subdivide or group the companies into the countries where they come from. So I'm going to add in country, just drag that down here to the row table, dropping it above company name, so we've got each country divided into companies. I'd like to also know when the orders were placed. So if I drag order date to the column labels area, I've got a minor problem there. The dialog box that I've been given, which unfortunately is too big to fit on the video screen here, tells me simply that I've got more than 256 items in this column area. Now, because I've got Excel running in what's called compatibility mode, if we look up here in the title bar, that means it's limited to 256 columns because it's working in a way which is backward compatible with Excel 2003 and earlier. In Excel 2007, inherently you can have 16,000 columns, so that wouldn't be an issue. But in our case, as I say, we are limited to 256. Now, it doesn't matter. As it says, only the first 256 items will be displayed. It will still include that data so that should I later pivot it round, it'll still be available. So I'm just going to say continue the drop. There we go, it doesn't fit. Do you want to show as much as is possible? Absolutely. Click OK. The reason I'm not worried about this is that I don't really want the order date. Yes, we've got more than 256 order dates, but I'm going to group this by year and by month, as I did in part 1 of this tutorial, and at that point there'll be less than 256, so not an issue. So I'm going to go right ahead and do that, simply by right-clicking on order date. If I choose group, specifying I want to group by month and by year, and there we go, 94, August, September, October, and so on. And if I scroll across, 95, and then 96 as well. So I've got my columns, I've got my row headings in place. Just need to pop some data into the data section. So again, I've got a field here that I used last time, line value. I can just drop it straight into the middle there, or I can drop it down onto the area here on the right. Sometimes it's easier if there's a lot of fields around to use this area here on the right. And I've now got the values in the middle, the total values. So here we go, we have a pivot table. But even with a pivot table, it can still be hard to spot what's going on. There's a lot of data here. There's still, we've got what have we got here? 116 rows of data, something like that, and we've got a bunch of columns over to column Z, so that's what, 26 columns of data. It's quite hard to spot what's going on, and there are times when it's useful just to be able to see things in a slightly more compact form. The way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to make these columns a little bit narrower so we can see a little bit more information without having to scroll. The way I'm going to do this is simply to move what were column headings and use those as row headings as well. Now I can do that directly by dragging from here, like so, to move years to the right of company name and country, or once again, if I bring back my field list, I can do that by dragging around in here. So I've put years here in the row labels area just below company, and I'm going to bring order date in as well, like that. So I've now got the country and the company name and the order date. In fact, that's the wrong way around, isn't it? I need the year and then the company, the order date. So I'm just going to drag it up in there. So we've got there we go, the years and then the order date, which is the month, in all of those in the row labels area of my pivot table. So, getting rid of this field list again, we've now got a slightly more compact version of our data. I've got more rows, got well over whatever it was, 116 rows I think last time, but we've got far fewer columns, so it's actually visible without having to scroll in two different directions to see my total. But it's still a little bit too extensive. It might well be that I'm not really interested in what the orders were in, I don't know, Belgium or Brazil. It might just be that I'm interested in the UK, or I'm interested in UK, France and Germany, or something like that. I might want to compare those to other countries, but that's not my primary focus. In order to achieve this, what I'm going to do is collapse the data. Now, there are a couple of ways of doing this. The easiest way, apparently, would simply be to right-click on the country and choose expand or collapse, and I can specify collapse to country, and there we go, all done in one click. I can simply see each country with a total, and if I'm interested in the UK, let's say, I can double click on UK, and there we go, it expands all the UK entries out like so. So that's great. I mean, that's given me exactly what I needed. I've got a much more compact and much more easy to view summary now of my data. But I'd like a little bit more interactivity. I'd like to be able to specify perhaps the UK and then just Bees Beverages or just Eastern Connection. So instead of collapsing the entire table in one go, I'm just going to uncollapse it. So if I right click again, expand and collapse, and choose expand entire field, that'll get me back to where I was. I'm going to do each of these columns in turn. So I right click on years, expand and collapse, collapse to years, or just collapse. Same thing again, right click on company name, doing the next one in, expand and collapse, collapse, and then the same with country. So having done it in several steps, that makes it easier to expand it in several steps. So if I'm interested in looking at, let's say, the history of French orders, I look here at France, I double click on France, I've now got, instead of all the data suddenly reappearing, I've just got company by company, the totals for the company. I can then double click on a company and see year by year totals for that company, and I can double click on a year and see month by month order totals. And if I double click on the year again, I can drill up and instead drill down to a different one. Similarly here, I can drill down or back up as I want to. And that's because I've collapsed it in several stages rather than simply collapsing the entire set of data in one go. So far so good. That works nicely. Be nice to get a little bit more information here. Just let me take a look at another company. Let me go into the USA. Let me go into Great Lakes Food Market. It'll do, I guess. 1996 there. 8891 in February, 570 in April, 1101.58 in May. What's the total for that? Doesn't tell me. Similarly, if I go into 95, here are my figures for 95, here are my figures for 96. Which was the better year? Can't really see at a glance. So what I'd like to be able to do is add in a total per year. I've got a total here for the company, Great Lakes Food Market total, 19,711.13, but I haven't got a total for each year. Now again, this is nice and easy to do with Excel 2007, possible to do with 2003 as well. You go to the field settings. In 2007 I simply right click on the year and I say subtotal years. And now we've got a 95 total, 9148, and a 96 total, 10562. Want to make them stand out a bit more? Again, very simple. Notice if I move the mouse around I get arrows every so often, which allow me to select different portions of my pivot table. Just the countries, the company name, and here the total row for 1995. But in fact, if I click here, you might be able to see that it's highlighting this row, the total for 95, but also this one, and in fact all the year totals, including those that I can't see here. And if I now go back to my Home tab and say I'd like to see those in something nice and vivid, perhaps bright yellow, there we go, we've got a total for each year and it stands out nicely. I can do the same for my companies, so if I choose the company there, choose something slightly more subtle perhaps, a pale blue, I've got a total for each company, even those I haven't got visible. So if I collapse USA down again and go to, let's say, Germany, oops, there we go. As soon as I expand out a company, I've got the year totals in yellow and the company total in blue. So there's another way of getting pivot tables to work. By using this drill down effect, you can get to the data and yet have a nice compact version of the data when you first look at it. I want to have a look at one more thing now, which is an idea using the page area up here at the top. If I just bring back, go into the options, bring back my field list, we've looked at this column labels area, we've looked at row labels, we've looked at values obviously, but we haven't really looked at the report filter area very much. Let's say I want to be able to see which suppliers were popular. I add supplier into the report filter area and it says I'm currently looking at all suppliers. Clicking on the arrow here, I can specify, no, actually I just want to see G'day Mate. There we go. Only looking at data for G'day Mate. If I choose select multiple items, I can now say I want to see G'day Mate, and also Bigfoot Breweries. And there we go. So I can select individual companies or multiple companies, and by ticking all at the top, once again I can see all companies. That's all well and good, but we've got one other thing I'd like to be able to do. Let's say it's come to the time of year when I need to renegotiate contracts with my existing suppliers. I want to be able to say to a particular supplier, yep, you're not doing so well at the moment, so I'm afraid we're not going to be able to place so much business with you, or with another supplier, we're doing lots of business with you, so we need a better price from you, whatever it might be. I can do that with this pivot table, there's no doubt. I can simply, when each supplier comes in for the meeting, choose the supplier's name and click OK. But there's a nice little trick up the sleeve of a pivot table. Notice down here at the bottom at the moment I've got my raw data, order history, and I've got the data sheet where I've created the pivot table. I'm just going to rename that, so main pivot table. There we go. Looking at the options tab here, the very first button on here, the pivot table button, if I click the arrow and then choose options in here, I can say show me the filter pages. And what that does is has a look what I've put in this filter area, which obviously in this case was just supplier, but I might have put supplier and country up there or something like that. And it says, alright, what do you want to see the pages of? In this case, because there's only a supplier, that's my only choice. And if I say, yeah, show me pages for the suppliers, clicking OK, off it goes and builds a sheet for each supplier. And you can see here, it even nicely names them for me. Now there's nothing particularly special about any of these. Each page is simply a pivot table with the data for that company alone. And again, because I've designed the original one with this drill down, I can drill down on each of these pages as well. It doesn't remove the rest of the data. I can still go into here and say, actually, on this page, show me all of it again. I mean, obviously that would kind of defeat the object, but it doesn't remove the data. We're not dealing with filtered data, except in the sense that it's only filtering what I can see, not filtering the data behind this pivot table. But it makes a nice, easy way of me being able to simply look at a particular supplier or a particular country, whatever it might be, by simply clicking on one and showing the data for that particular supplier. Still got the raw data, still got my main pivot table that I had originally with all the suppliers showing simultaneously, but it means it's a nice easy way of having a sheet dedicated to each item in my pivot table. So hopefully that was useful. And then there's one last point in this tutorial. We'll have a later tutorial about pivot charts, and the last point is that if I look at my data, let's take the UK for example, and I'm looking at around the Horn and these beverages, sort of 13,000, 6,000, and I look at this one and I think, wow, Eastern Connection had a really high value here. Let's have a look at that in more detail. And the figures are all much of a muchness. I've got 700, 600, a couple of thousand there, 3,000 there. Suddenly this figure here for May really stands out. Nearly 7,000. That's twice as much, more than twice as much as the nearest other month. I wonder why that was. What happened in there? With a pivot table, if you double click on any summarized piece of data here, the total for May for example, it builds a new sheet with just the data for that one piece of information. So the total of whatever it was, 6,900, was made up of the totals here for this set of data. And you can see that this is all the data for Eastern Connection for May 1996. If I go back to my pivot table, compare that to another one here, the second highest one was that one there, February 95. If I double click on that, there we go, a few orders there, but again a high value in total, largely because of this one order here. And I again get the breakdown of my data, Eastern Connection, this time February 1995, so it allows me very quickly to go back to my raw data and see what made up the total for that bit of the pivot table. Now it's worth mentioning perhaps that it does this creating a new sheet each time. So I've done this twice. It's called it sheet 31 and sheet 32. If you do a lot of this double clicking on the totals, you're going to end up with a lot of sheets with names like sheet 741, and that's not necessarily what you're after. So what I'd suggest is, if you decide that the data is going to be useful, rename it. So here we go, Eastern Connection orders, what was it, May 96. So I've renamed that so I can find it more easily, and this one here decided I don't want, so I'm simply going to remove that sheet like so that I don't end up with lots of sheets that are just numbered. So there we go, a couple more tricks there with pivot tables, including a drill down effect, adding totals and formatting rows in a pivot table, and also the idea of creating pages, multiple pages for a pivot table, expanding out the pivot table, and then getting to the raw data simply by double clicking on the grand total that you see within the pivot table. Hope that was useful and interesting. There is lots more you can do with pivot tables. Why not look at coming on one of our training courses if it's of interest to you, and we can do this with your own data at your own time, with you and your colleagues as you wish. But in the meantime, hopefully this was useful, and look out soon for a video on creating pivot charts. Thanks very much.